This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. Psst, healthcare pros, word's out, and it's too good to keep quiet. Look, LinkedIn is revolutionizing job hunting, making it possible to search by specialty, shift preference, and salary. Endless scrolling is out. Whether it's a mental health therapist or dental hygienist, finding the perfect role is faster and easier than ever. Head to linkedin.com/healthcare and start your search today.
When I wake up, well, I know I'm gonna be the man who wakes up next to you. When I go out, yeah, I know I'm gonna be the man who goes along with you. If I get drunk,
it is so much more fun to put together a podcast after a win than it is a loss. And thanks to Oklahoma's 26-7 win over South Carolina on Saturday, that's exactly what we get to do. Now, I get it that there's still some frustration lingering after Oklahoma's loss to Texas a week ago. But the Sooners are now at 6 wins on the season. And what did we say? Go all the way back to, July, August. What do we want? We want to see improvement. We want to see steady improvement. Oklahoma is now at win number 6 on the 2025 season, 6-1 for a record. We had to wait until week 11, our game 11 last year, to get to that 6th win. So you're looking at a 6-1 record with 5 games left on the schedule. Even if they go, let's say they go 2-3, that's a marked improvement. They go 3-2, I think, we're talking some playoff stuff. But, there are certain games that they don't just show up as another W in the win column. And really what they do is they redefine a team's identity. And that's what I want to talk about today. That's what I want this first segment of our podcast to be about today, because Oklahoma's win on Saturday, I think it was one of those games. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't some kind of offensive fireworks show. But what it was, in my opinion, pure Brent Venables football. And you're going to hear me say that a couple of times in this episode of the Sooner Nation podcast, because this was about physicality. This was about discipline. This was about pride. And after getting humbled by Texas a week ago and really hearing all of the noise about whether Oklahoma could handle the grind of this conference, the Sooners came out, and I feel like they answered every single one of those questions the way a Brent Venables coach team should. They dominated defensively from the very beginning to the very end. I mean, think about it. From that opening series, you could tell that the energy was different. Sure, South Carolina got all the way down to a goal-to-goal situation, but they were stonewalled. And you've got guys leading that defensive front, guys like Taylor Wine, guys like David Stone, guys like R. Mason Thomas, and they all played with a purpose. What I mean by that is they didn't just occupy blocks, they destroyed them. And the end result was 6 sacks, 13 tackles for loss. That is the identity of this defense. South Carolina finished with just 224 total yards of offense for the day. And when you look at the overall performance from this defense, that's not just good, that's elite. That's the type of defensive performance that travels. That's the type of defensive performance that wins games in November. And when you're talking about the conference race, which is wide open, it gives you a shot here in the SEC. And I think what I liked the most, I'll even say what I loved the most, was that Oklahoma dictated everything. South Carolina wanted to establish the run, but by the second quarter, that idea was just dead. The Sooners completely shut down the line of scrimmage. And I think that's been the biggest difference between this year's Oklahoma team and the versions that we saw during the Lincoln Riley years. You remember back then, Oklahoma's defense was mostly reactive then. They played after the offense had dictated the tempo. But now you've got a defense with Brent Venables they're the ones that are dictating. They're the ones that are setting the terms. And they control the rhythm. And you could see it in how often Lenora Sellers was under duress. I even said at one point to our group chat where we're watching the game, it's almost comical. It's almost comical to watch quarterbacks run away from this defense because there's nowhere to go. And Sellers never looked comfortable on Saturday. And when he's off schedule, well, so is South Carolina's offense. And that's what they wanted. The Sooners knew that. They executed their game plan, defensive game plan, to perfection. And I don't know if it's fair to say that these two guys are becoming the heartbeat of the defense, but I definitely think they're tone setters. Because I think when you consider the heartbeat of this defense, sure, R. Mason Thomas, he's your guy. David Stone, he's your guy. Peyton Bowen. But man, what we're getting as fans and what the coaches are getting from Taylor Wine and Kendall Daniels is just, man, it's spectacular. It's over the top almost. Wine he's just relentless. He's one of those guys where you'd say every snap, it looks like he's playing with his hair on fire. He doesn't take any plays off. And what he does is he sets the tone with effort. And that kind of energy that he gives, it's really contagious. You see it. When he wins a rep early in a series, I feel like the rest of the defensive line feeds off of it. And dang, man, Kendall Daniels, can you imagine if Oklahoma had him for his full career, what he could be? I mean, he is emerging as one of the top caliber defenders in this conference. He's not just a tackler. He is a punisher. And as a leader here in the back end of Oklahoma's defense, he's that guy who cleans up everything when chaos kind of breaks loose. The defensive line eats up blocks. The linebackers jump in there and fill gaps. And then Kendall Daniels is the headhunter that gets that punishing tackle at the end of it. He plays downhill. He communicates. And I love the edge of physicality that he brings. I really do. I think it's safe to say that's something that's been missing in Norman for a while. I would even say this. I think when we're talking about Kendall Daniels, I'd even go so far as to say that he's becoming Venables' on-field extension. He's that guy who embodies the smart, fast, physical identity that Venables likes. And when you talk to players around the program, they'll tell you that his voice carries weight. He's one of those guys that doesn't say much, but when he speaks, everyone seems to listen. And that's how you build championship defenses. Through guys like Taylor Wine, through guys like Kendall Daniels. They're not just guys who make plays, they're guys who help either set the standard or carry the standard. Now, when you look at what this defense has done through 7 weeks of football, the question has always been, and I think it's a fair question, but can this level of defensive dominance hold up when Oklahoma starts to face the heavyweights? Because that's what's coming. And if we're going to be honest, and we're going to have some real talk here, as good as South Carolina's home field atmosphere is, they're a middle of the pack at best SEC offense. And the real test is coming. You got Ole Miss, you got Alabama, you got Missouri. Those are the types of teams that can test you vertically. They can spread you out. They can make you play sideline to sideline. But here's the thing. Oklahoma doesn't have to be perfect defensively in those games. They just have to stay true to who they are. What makes this defense special, it's not schematics, it's discipline and communication. Brent Venables has built this system around trust. Every player has to own his gap, own his assignment. He has to know his keys and play without hesitation. And when that clicks, it looks exactly like what we saw in Columbia. A unit moving in sync, every man on the same page. And if they keep playing that way, fast, aggressive, assignment sound, then yeah, this is absolutely a level of defense that's sustainable through the last 5 games of the season. Because here's the truth. Oklahoma doesn't need to win shootouts anymore. They can grind it out. They can win those grind out football games. And I think that's what separates pretenders from contenders, to use the old cliche. So this win, we're going to talk more about it, but this win wasn't just important in the terms of standings. I think it mattered in perception. For the last several years, Oklahoma has been branded as that Big 12 team with the explosive offense and the shaky defense. And I've talked about that narrative so much this season because it's gone. I'm talking about the narrative that they could hang 50 points on anybody, but they couldn't stop a nosebleed when it mattered. And as we see week in and week out, even through the loss last week to Texas, that's not who they are anymore. Venables has changed the DNA of this program. And now people are starting to say Oklahoma's defense is for real. And when you start hearing that from national media, from guys who watched Oklahoma give up 40 points in a game in the past, that's a major shift. It means that recruits are taking notice as well. It means that future SEC opponents are taking notice. You don't think Lane Kiffin's burning the midnight oil even on Sunday night? How do I stop this monster that's coming at me? I mean, what that means is that this program has officially turned the corner. And the stats back it up. The Sooners are second nationally in points allowed. They're top 5 in rush defense, and they're among the national leaders in both sacks and third down defense. That's not a fluke, guys. That's identity. And identity is what sustains programs when adversity hits. And here's the best part. I mean, to me, I love this. You can see how much pride the players take in it. There's a swagger on that defense now. It's not arrogance, but it's belief. They expect to dominate. They expect to control the game. And seriously, when's the last time you could say that about Oklahoma football? You saw that transition begin to start really last year, take hold. But you couldn't have said it through 7 weeks like we have this year. And at the end of the day, this wasn't about stats. It was about standards. Oklahoma got punched in the mouth by Texas. And the question all week was simple. How would they respond? I did a whole podcast episode on it. Would they let one loss turn into 2 losses? Or would they reassert who they are? And we got the answer on Saturday. They went on the road into a tough environment against a physical conference team, and they owned the line of scrimmage. They dictated the terms. They played Oklahoma football the way Brent Venables has been preaching since day one of his return to Norman. It was a statement. It said the standard hasn't changed. We just needed a reminder. Now, if you're an Oklahoma fan, I think you have to love what you saw, because this wasn't just a bounce back. It was a blueprint. I believe it was a blueprint for how this team can win, not just this year, but for the seasons to come. I mean, and you think about Jaden Jackson, you think about David Stone, those dudes are sophomores. So when people talk about Oklahoma football today, it's time that they stop talking about 50-point shootouts and Heisman Trophy quarterbacks, because this version of Oklahoma football, they win with defense. They win with toughness. And I think that they're on their way back to national contention because of it. Man, I love hosting the Sooner Nation podcast. It's not a full-time job. It is a hobby. I'm thankful for those who have come along and taken this trip with us. Last week I wasn't able to do the midweek podcast because of my travel schedule with my real job. This week, Caleb is usually with me on Sundays, but he's not because of his real job. But thank you so much for all of us. Even with limited podcasting last week, we're still seeing growth. And I just want to say thank you. If you're new to the podcast, wherever you're catching us on Spotify or iHeartRadio or wherever you're getting us, would you subscribe? That helps us. It helps us immensely in what we do. Regarding the Sooners, it's kind of funny how quickly the noise can shift in college football. Go back to, a week ago, 7 days. People were questioning Oklahoma. They were questioning Brent Venables. They were questioning this team's identity, and they were even wondering, I saw some people, there are receipts out there, is this team built for life in the SEC? Then you fast forward to Saturday, and that noise kind of got quiet because Oklahoma didn't just beat South Carolina. They answered South Carolina. They walked into Columbia, they dominated from the opening whistle, and they reminded the entire country that they are still belong in the college football playoff conversation. 26-7 on the road. The story wasn't just the result here on Saturday, it was the response. Because for all the doubts that swirled around after Dallas, and I think rightfully so, I'm not saying those were unmerited or unwarranted, but this was exactly the kind of performance that reestablishes a team's identity. Like I said in the opening segment, this was Brent Venables' brand of football. You saw the discipline, you saw the physical nature of it, and you saw that they were relentless. Think about this. Through 3 quarters, South Carolina had 6 first downs. 6. They finished with just 224 total yards. That's not a team just surviving a road test. That's a team dictating one. And I think you can feel it in the body language, in the tackling, in the line play. This wasn't about style points for Oklahoma. It never was. It was about restoring their standards. And then on Sunday, the polls took notice. Oklahoma jumped 2 spots to number 11 in the coaches poll. They climbed back to number 13 in the AP poll. They are right there. They are just outside. They're knocking on the door of the top 10. They're ranked just ahead of Vanderbilt and Notre Dame, and they're sitting within striking distance of Ole Miss, who, by the way, is coming to Norman on Saturday. I think Saturday was validation for a team that has fought through adversity. And I think it was proof that voters still believe in the Sooners. And one of the most complete, I guess I'd say this, it's proof that Sunday, I'll learn to talk one day, but Sunday was proof that voters still believe in the Sooners and that they are one of the most complete teams in the country. So where does that leave us moving forward? Well, I think part of the rise came from chaos. Think about it this way. The college football weekend, it was insane, right? It was wild. You got multiple top 10 teams falling for the first time. And suddenly the playoff picture, as well as, conference races, everything looks wide open. I think at this point, literally everyone is chasing Ohio State. The Buckeyes got 65 of 66 first place votes. I don't know what's wrong with that one person because, clearly to me, I think they're the best team in the country. Behind them, you got Indiana. I still have questions. I'm having a hard time believing. Texas A&M, I'm having a hard time believing. Alabama, now here we go. I've been talking to you guys about Alabama even after their loss to Florida State. And then Georgia. I think at this point, if you made me bet on what's going to take place in Atlanta in December, I think it's a rematch between those two teams. But A&M could stay in there. They could. We'll see how the SEC Power Rankings come out Tuesday, heartland-sports.com. But here's where it gets interesting to me. You've got Ole Miss coming to Norman. They dropped to number 8 after losing that shootout to Georgia. And so now Oklahoma not only has momentum, they've got opportunity. They're sitting in a perfect position, I believe, to make noise, a lot of noise down the stretch. 6-1 overall, 2-1 in conference. Every remaining opponent on their schedule is ranked. Talking about number 8, Ole Miss, number 17, Tennessee, number 4, Alabama, number 15, Missouri, number 20, LSU. That's not just a tough stretch, that's a gauntlet. But people are, how terrible this is. I think it's opportunistic. I think it's a gift. Because if Oklahoma can go 4-1 through that run, they'll be right in the thick of the playoff race in December. I think even at 3-2, that keeps them alive because of the strength of the schedule. And I believe, honestly, it's that strong. But if you go 2 or 3 or worse, you're back to that maybe next year category. But still, even at 2 and 3, you see that marked improvement from last year to this year. So this is it. This is where the season, and I think maybe the early era of Brent Venables' SEC tenure, it gets defined. And you know what's interesting? I think this is fascinating because when Venables came back to Norman, he wasn't just trying to win. He was trying to rebuild. Remember, he promised to make Oklahoma tough again, to build around defense, to build around discipline and physicality. Those are the kind of traits that win in the SEC. And through 7 games, I don't think you can deny it. The identity has taken hold. We talked about this in the opening segment. The Sooners rank number 1 in the nation in total defense. They're giving up just 211 yards per game. They're 3rd in pass defense, allowing just 126 yards through the air. And they've surrendered, all 7 games, they've surrendered just 2 passing touchdowns. That's not a coincidence. That is coaching. That is culture, and that's the players buying in. And in Columbia, it all came together. 6 sacks, 13 tackles for loss. They didn't just contain South Carolina, they smothered them. And here's the thing. It's not like it's South Carolina. They're 3-4 now. That argument doesn't work, because if you look at pregame and you look at SEC Nation, you look at College Game Day, there were people there picking South Carolina to beat Oklahoma. So that was an impressive defensive performance. You can't change the narrative after the game. That was the kind of defensive performance that Brent Venables has been building towards since day one. That's that Clemson DNA, if I can say that we saw on display there. And I think that's what makes Oklahoma so dangerous moving into this stretch. Now, let's take just a second, though, and let's talk about the other side of the ball. And we'll talk the final segment of the podcast mostly about offense. But just for this conversation right here, we look at how the defense has restored the standard. I think the offense has finally started to find one. John Mateer, to me, looked different. He looked confident. He looked calm. He looked efficient. 18 for 26, 150 yards, 1 touchdown. But here's the important thing. You've heard me rail against this. There were 0 turnovers from Mateer, 0 turnovers from this team. And I talked about extensively ahead of this game how important that stat was right there. And you've got a quarterback who wasn't trying to do too much like he did in the Cotton Bowl. He just ran the offense. He moved the chains. He extended drives, but I think you saw him trust the playmakers around him. And speaking of playmakers, how about Torrey Blaylock? 101 yards on the ground for the freshman. And he gave this offense a physical edge that's been missing. We definitely didn't see it against Texas. And that's what Venables and Ben Arbuckle have been preaching, balance. It doesn't have to be flashy. It just has to be efficient. And I think what you saw with Robinson and Blaylock, those are your 2 running backs moving forward. I think they have to be. We're done with Ott. We're done with Barnes. It's those 2 guys. Because when you see what you had on Saturday, you can combine that kind of control with a dominant defense. I don't think there's anywhere in the SEC that you cannot win. So, yeah, maybe Oklahoma isn't built to hang half 100 on people like the old days, but they don't need to be. They just need to keep controlling tempo, protecting the football, and letting the defense close the door. Now, let me go back to the rankings for just another second or a minute or 2, right? We live in an era where the polls don't determine the playoff spots, but they still shape the conversation. They tell you how the rest of the country sees you. And right now, the message is clear. Oklahoma is back in the picture. They're not quite in that inner circle, but they're in the conversation. The coaches poll says number 11. Now, what that means is that people actually, the people who are preparing for Oklahoma every week, they respect what this team is. They respect what Brent Venables has built. The AP poll says number 13. That means that the media sees a very good team, but they still have to prove it against elite competition. And I think both of those are fair, because the next month it's going to answer every question that we may have left about this program. Can Oklahoma's offense win when the defense doesn't dominate? Can they go toe-to-toe with Alabama's athletes, with Ole Miss's tempo? What about the pace that Tennessee sets? Because the Vols are going to be hungry. Can they handle the noise, the spotlight, the stakes that are there? Those are the playoff type challenges, and that's exactly what Venables wanted when he took this job. And now here it comes. Here comes the first one. This Saturday, number 8, Ole Miss. It's the first time the Rebels have ever come to Norman to play football. And Lane Kiffin's group, they just got into a shootout with Georgia. And you know they're going to come out firing. ESPN's SEC Nation is going to be back on campus, second time this year. The Oklahoma Memorial Stadium is going to be packed. It's going to be loud. It's going to be ready. And the atmosphere, it has to be what Oklahoma needs. It has to be amped up. Because if they win this one, if they take down Ole Miss, suddenly you're talking about a top 10 team with playoff momentum and a legitimate path to the SEC title. That's what's on the line Saturday. Now, you lose this game, you fall back into that crowded middle tier, and you're fighting the uphill battle again. Win, the conversation changes completely. So I think here's what's really cool about this version of Oklahoma football. I think what we saw on Saturday, what we saw through the first 5 weeks of the season, it is all sustainable. It's not built on one hot quarterback or one lucky stretch of turnovers. We certainly know that. It's built on fundamentals. It's built on tackling. It's built on gap discipline. It's built on turnover margin. And it's built on complementary football. Those are the things that win in October and in December because they travel. And that's what Venables, you go back, that's what he's preached. And that's what he's been patient to build. And many of us in Sooner Nation have been patient with him. It's the kind of team that can take its game anywhere, in any condition, and still dictate the pace. And right now, that's exactly what we're seeing. A team that knows who it is, a defense that leads, and an offense that's learning how to complement that defense. And that's how you build something that's lasting. You don't want a one-hit wonder. You want this to be consistent through the years. So yeah, Oklahoma's climb from number 13 to number 11. It may look small on paper, but in context, I think it's huge. I think there's some validation to it. I think it's momentum. I think it's belief. It's the rest of the country realizing that the Sooners, they're not just adjusting to SEC life, they're starting to thrive in it. And the next 5 games, they're going to tell the full story. But I think for right now, let's celebrate the moment. For right now, the message is clear. Oklahoma's not fading away. They are coming for you. They control their own destiny. And if they keep playing defense the way they did in Columbia, if Mateer and Blaylock keep growing in rhythm, then when late November comes, the Sooners are going to be right there where they wanted to be all along. In the playoff hunt, in the SEC title conversation, and back among the nation's elite. So you look at Saturday, statement win from Oklahoma. Their return to form and their shot to make a real playoff push. But now you got to start looking at Ole Miss. And another chance to prove that this new identity is not just talk, that it's real, and that this team is ready. Football fans always like to talk about identity. defensive identity, offensive identity, team identity. If we're being honest, very few teams actually know who they are halfway through a season. And right now, I think that's exactly where Oklahoma finds itself offensively. We've talked extensively in this episode about where the defense is. But I think the offense is probably somewhere between control and creativity. When you look at Saturday's win over South Carolina, 26-7, 2 points came from the defense, 24 from the offense. But the Sooners showed that they can win playing smart, efficient, ball control football. But I think it also left the question, is that enough when Ole Miss is coming to town on Saturday? Let's start with the quarterback. Now, John Mateer, he didn't light up the stat sheet. 18 for 26, 150 yards, a touchdown. But as I said, the most important thing was no turnovers. That's what was so valuable. And why the line doesn't scream highlight reel, it does scream winning football, because that's the formula right there for Oklahoma. I think what stood out most to me wasn't his arm, but it was the poise that he had. Coming off the Texas game, the biggest question was how this offense would respond mentally. Would they press? Would they force things? Or would they simplify it? Would they settle in and get back to execution? And John Mateer answered that. He played within himself. He took what the defense gave him. He didn't panic when the pocket collapsed, and he didn't make the mistake of other inexperienced quarterbacks might do by trying to be Superman. And that's where I think you start to see maturity with him. You're starting to see a quarterback in this game who understands that sometimes the best play may be the one you don't make. I don't want to keep going back to Texas because that's behind us now, but a perfect example of that the interception that I railed on all week last week, the interception before the half, that was a play he should not have made. And I think Saturday there were a couple of moments that said a lot about John Mateer. Early in the second quarter, he checked out of a bad run look, and he hit Blaylock in the flat. It was just a 6-yard gain, 5 or 6, but you're ahead of the chains now. That's not flashy, but it's smart. Later on in the red zone, rather than forcing a tight window throw, he tucked and ran and set up a 1st and goal. And then the Sooners scored 2 plays later. It's those kinds of decisions. It's those small, mature moments that make a huge difference in high levels of football. Well, really, I think in all levels of football. But Mateer's poise, for as good as it was on Saturday, it really doesn't mean much if he's running for his life. And after the Texas game, I think the offensive line took a lot of heat, and rightfully so. But fair or not, the perception was that they got bullied in the Cotton Bowl. But against South Carolina, I think they answered back. They didn't just protect better. They controlled the line of scrimmage themselves. And you could tell early in that game that Bill Bedenbowl and that unit took it personally. They played with attitude from Oklahoma's opening drive. They were moving people. There were double teams. They were finishing. The edges were sealed. And most importantly, they gave Mateer time to operate. Now, those edges, I'll go back to that for just a second because that's something that we said going into the game was going to be vital. And I think that's where you have to give some credit to Torrey Blaylock as well. He turned the holes that were open into chunk plays. 101 yards on the ground. He averaged just over 5 yards per carry. And that's the kind of steady production that changes everything for an offense that's trying to find rhythm. Because when the run game clicks, it opens the playbook. It gives Arbuckle balance. It lets him keep defenses honest. And probably most importantly, it lets Oklahoma's defense rest. When you look at the time of possession, Oklahoma controlled the ball for nearly 34 minutes. That wasn't just a coincidence. That was complementary football. The defense set the tone early. The offense rewarded them by staying on the field. And that's how you win road games. But here's the question that keeps coming up. Was this Oklahoma offense too conservative on Saturday? I think maybe it's a fair question because we've gotten used to Oklahoma being that team that stretches the field vertically, right? We talked about it, that team that drops 45, 50 points without breaking a sweat. But this offense, it's not built that way, at least not yet. And that's okay, as long as they lean into what they do well, right? Because right now, it's efficiency. Right now, it's balance. It's taking care of the football. Those are the things that they're trying to establish their identity on. But the challenge is going to come when they play teams that can score in bunches. And one of those is coming to Norman on Saturday. We know Ole Miss can push the tempo. We know that Alabama is finding rhythm with Ty Simpson. We know that Missouri has speed everywhere. At some point, you'll need to hit shots downfield. You'll need explosive plays. They're not going to go throughout the rest of the season without needing those types of moments. Because in this conference, efficiency keeps you in games, but explosiveness sometimes is what wins those games. So the question becomes, can Oklahoma find a middle ground? Can they remain disciplined and balanced while still developing a few big play wrinkles? I absolutely think they can. I think it starts with using Mateer's mobility. I loved how they moved the pocket on Saturday. John Mateer's sneaky athletic, and when he extends plays, receivers find space. They've also got to find creative ways to get their playmakers into space, whether it's motioning Giovanni Gibson, using Deion Burks on sweeps, or just calling design screens that build confidence, rhythm, and momentum. It's not about abandoning ball control as much as it's about expanding it. And that's where you got to kind of look back at Ben Arbuckle. He got outcoached in the Cotton Bowl. He was a master in Columbia. And I think he's quietly navigating this transition pretty well. Keep in mind, he's still young. Keep in mind, this is the highest level of football that he's ever coached in. And he's been tasked with taking over an offense that's redefining itself. It's shifting from tempo and spread to rhythm and structure. It's not easy. And that's what Arbuckle did against South Carolina, though. It was actually, I think, it was pretty brilliant in its simplicity. He didn't overcomplicate the game plan. He leaned into it, and he gave the team what they needed, which was stability. Run the ball. Use it to set up play action. Protect the quarterback. Those were all the staples that we saw on Saturday. But I do think, probably even this weekend, you're going to see him open things up a little bit more because he has to. And he's got a track record of it. His history at Western Kentucky and Washington State, it shows that he loves tempo and he loves misdirection. He loves creating matchup advantages, but all within the right framework. After you almost had to set the reset button after the Texas game. When you had problems from the offensive line to the quarterback to the running back, everything was messed up. So you go back to the basics. And then you build off of that. And now that the offensive line is stabilizing, he's going to have more confidence to take those calculated risks, whether it's a shot on first down, a designated rollout, or a creative RPO concept, because the best coordinators adjust week to week. And I think for the most part, Arbuckle's done that pretty well. And I said earlier, it is Torrey Blaylock and Xavier Robinson. That's the running game. And if they continue to develop behind these guys, I think what becomes exciting is that this offense would have the personnel to be flexible. They can pound the ball one week and then air it out the next week. They can adapt to who they're playing. That's not a weakness. That is absolutely a strength. And when you look at the big picture, remember, we always like to zoom out here on the Sooner Nation podcast. This is a different kind of Oklahoma football. It's what we've talked about. It's not a 600-yard performance. It's not about fireworks. It's about control. It's about balance. It's about efficiency because of what happens on the defensive side of the ball. And that identity, that control, balance, efficiency, that perfectly is suited for life in the SEC. Venables and Arbuckle, they don't need to prove that Oklahoma can score 50. What they need to prove is that Oklahoma can win a football game 27-20. That they can close games out in the fourth quarter like they did against Michigan, like they did against Auburn. That they can protect the football and that they can trust their defense. And I think that's what Saturday was about. It was about the offense learning that sometimes the best play is patience. That winning ugly, you know what? It's still winning. And when you've got a top 5 defense, that's the formula that works. That's the formula you want to lean into. Still, the beauty of this game and really the beauty of this moment for Oklahoma is that you can feel the growth happening. You can see the pieces coming together. This is a team that's learning how to win in multiple ways. And that's what championship caliber teams do. So offensive balance or conservative play, maybe the answer isn't one or the other. Maybe it's both. What we saw in Columbia was a disciplined, intentional offense, one that did not beat itself. Now the challenge is to keep that same discipline while adding layers, tempo, creativity, calculated aggression. Because as the season goes on down this stretch that we've been watching come since September, you need both gears. The ability to grind out a 10-play drive and the ability to hit a knockout shot when the window opens, you need both of those. And for Oklahoma, Saturday afternoon was a step in the right direction. The balance is coming. The confidence is growing. And if Arbuckle and Mateer can keep that rhythm, they can be patient but purposeful. This team's offensive ceiling may be a lot higher than what we thought it was. And we've always thought it was pretty high. So maybe the takeaway isn't that Oklahoma's offense is conservative. Maybe it's that they're evolving, that they're learning to press and when they should press and when they should protect. They're learning when to unleash and when to control. And again, I think in this level, in this conference, that type of maturity is what puts you in championship contention. That's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Sooner Nation podcast. Again, thanks so much for everybody who pays attention to us, gives us your time. You can find us every day, heartland-sports.com. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us on Instagram. We're growing both those communities. Facebook, over 15,000 followers. Thank you guys for being a part of this ride. Enjoy your week, everybody. See you soon.
Watching